What's happening, guys? My name's Nicholas Renaud, and in today's video we're going to take a look at how you can deploy your very own machine learning model using Watson Machine Learning. Let's take a deeper look as to what we're going to be going through. So the first thing that we're going to do is take our trained model and save it up into Watson Machine Learning. So for this, we'll be using the Watson Machine Learning Python API. So the majority of this video is going to be inside of Python. We'll then take that saved model and we'll actually create an online deployment. So this will allow us to make live scoring requests using our Python API. And then last but not least, we're actually going to do exactly that. So we'll take our deployed model, send some data up, and actually get a scoring request back. So you'll actually be able to see your predictions in real time. So let's take a look as to how this is all going to fit together and take a look at the plumbing. So the first thing that we're going to do is train a machine learning model using Jupyter and Scikit-Learn. So I've got all the code pre-written for you, so you don't actually need to write this. Then we'll take that model and we'll actually save it up and deploy it inside of Watson Machine Learning. So these are two key distinct steps. So we actually take it, save it up there, and then from that saved model, we deploy it. Then last but not least, what we're going to do is grab the details for that deployed model and actually make a scoring request. So we'll take some data out of our pandas data frame and send it all the way up into Watson Machine Learning and get a prediction back. Ready to do it? Let's get to it. Alrighty, so in order to go and deploy our machine learning model, we first need a machine learning model. So in order to actually run through this video, what we're going to be doing is leveraging the code that we pre-wrote inside of the set of full stack machine learning videos. So everything that you're seeing here is actually included, and I walk through it in great detail in the full stack machine learning playlist. So you can pick that up if you want. I'll include a link to it somewhere above. In this particular case, we're going to run through all of these cells and get ourselves to a trained machine learning model. So once we get to that step, which is all the way down here, we'll actually be able to see our trained machine learning model and then actually step in and start running through our deployment steps. Now, once we've got to that, there's about 4 key steps that we need to run through in order to deploy our model. So first up, we need to import and install our dependencies. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. So import and install our dependencies, authenticate to our Watson Machine Learning service. So I'll show you how to set that up. Then we can save and deploy our model and then score against this deployed model. Now again, all of this code that I'm showing in here, including the completed Jupyter notebook, as well as all the links to the stuff that we're going to be using, are going to be included in the description below. So fret not if I've gone through quite a fair bit right now, all going to be available for you. So the first thing that we're going to start out by doing is actually just run through every cell in this notebook up to that evaluation step. Now, in order to run through this quickly, we can just hit Shift Enter and smash through it. So this is just taking us through all the different steps in terms of building a machine learning model from scratch. Now, again, if you want to check out this tutorial, just check out the full stack machine learning playlist. We're just going to quickly run through it. And so this is actually building a machine learning model using Scikit-Learn. So we'll let that finish training, and ideally what we should get is some evaluation metrics down there, and that allows us to know that our machine learning model is trained. Then we can start deploying. So we'll be right back in a second. Alrighty, and that's now done. So you can see that our machine learning model successfully went through and fit all the different models in our machine learning pipeline. So we're looking good there, and we've also got some evaluation metrics. Now, looks in this case that our random forest model is performing the best. So we're going to set that as the model that we're actually going to go on about and deploy. Now, the first thing that we need to do in terms of actually going and deploying our models is importing and installing some dependencies. So the main dependency that we're going to need in this particular case is IBM Watson Machine Learning. So let's go on ahead and install that. Alrighty, so that's IBM Watson Machine Learning installed. Now, in order to do that, we've just written ! pip install, then we've passed the -u flag, which allows us to update, and then we've specified IBM Watson machine learning. So this allows us to install the library that's going to allow us to work with the machine learning service. Now, we haven't actually set up the service yet. We're going to do that in a sec, but we're going to still need this package installed within our Python environment to work with it. Now, what we can do is import those dependencies. So let's do it. Alrighty, and those are our dependencies imported. So we've gone and imported 3 key things there. So first up, what we've written is from IBM _Watson _machine _learning. We've imported the API client. So this is going to be the main client that we use to work with our Watson Machine Learning service. We've also imported JSON, so import JSON, and then we've also imported NumPy as NP. So for that, we've written import NumPy as NP. So this is just going to make it a little bit easier to work with our data later on once we go to our scoring step. Now, the next thing that we're going to need to do is authenticate and set up our space. Now, there's also one additional step in there in that we actually need to set up what's in machine learning. So in order to start doing that, we're going to jump on over to IBM Cloud. Now, if you happen to be working with Cloud Pak for Data, it's a slightly different step for authenticating, but the large majority of everything I'm showing still stays relatively standard, but I'll include some notes somewhere above to give you the differences. So setting up what's in machine learning. So what we now need to do is just go to IBM Cloud. So if you go to cloud.ibm.com, you should be prompted to log in. So I'm going to log in. And so from IBM Cloud, we're able to set up our what's in machine learning service to actually go on about deploying it. Now, when we actually go about deploying, we're actually going to be able to deploy it as an online scoring API or a batch scoring model. But in this case, we're going to be deploying an API. So in order to set up what's in machine learning, what we need to do is just go to the catalog, which is right up here. And then select services on the left-hand side. And then if you choose AI and machine learning, sorry, I'm zooming in and out quite a fair bit there. And if you then go on about and select machine learning, which is over here. So this gives you a little bit of info. So IBM what's machine learning, make smarter decisions, solve tough problems, and improve user outcomes. Now there's a free tier in this, and that's going to be the one that we're going to be using. So that's more than enough if you're just getting started. Now, in this particular case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spinning up a light tier. Now, a key thing to note is what region you're spinning up your service in. So in this case, we can spin it up in London, Dallas, Frankfurt, and Tokyo. So we're just going to stick with Dallas for now, but just keep in the back of your mind which region you're selecting, because this is going to be important later on when we go to authenticate. So we're going to leave it as Dallas, and then we're going to select the light plan. So that's going to be a free plan. So it allows you to get started and play around with the machine learning service. So select light and then hit create. Sweet, so that's our machine learning service set up. So then what we're going to do is select access in Watson Studio, so down there. And this is actually going to allow us to set up a deployment space. So our deployment spaces allow us to deploy machine learning models into different environments. So say you wanted a deployment space for dev, test, or prod, this is sort of the way that they act. Now, in this particular case, we're going to create a new one. So what we're going to do is as soon as we get into Watson Studio, we're going to scroll on over here and hit deployments. Now, in this case, I already had Watson Studio set up, so it's just gone straight through to it. You might need to click through a couple of additional setup steps, but again, there's a free tier there. So once we've got to deployments, what we're then going to do is select new deployment space from up here. And then we're going to name our deployment space. Now, in this case, we're going to name our deployment space prod because I've already got a dev and a test one. And then if I scroll on down, what we now need to do is associate our machine learning service. So from down here, we just need to select the service that we just created. And the one that we set up was called 9G. So we're going to select machine learning -9G. And if we scroll up, then all we need to do is hit create, and that will be our deployment space set up. So this is good to go now. So once we have this deployment space ready, we can then shift back into our Jupyter Notebook and start getting ready to deploy our service. Perfect, so our deployment space is now deployed, so we can then hit view new space. Now we'll keep this open because once we actually go and save our model and deploy it, we'll actually be able to see it in here so we can play around with it from there. So let's go on ahead and jump back into our Jupyter Notebook and start getting ready to authenticate. So if we add in a new cell, what we're going to do is first set up our credentials dictionary. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to need an API key and a URL. So let's set up a template and then I'll show you where to get these. Alrighty, so that's our template WML credential dictionary set up. Now, as you can see here, we need two things. So we need our API key and we need a URL. Now, this is a core change between the Watson Machine Learning V2 service versus the V4 service. So the way you authenticate is a little bit different now. So in terms of grabbing your URL, this is really just linked to where you went and set up your Watson Machine Learning service. So remember, we set ours up in Dallas. So if you actually scroll up, I've included the URLs that you need. So the Dallas URL is going to be https:// US-south .ml.cloud.ibm.com. Now again, I'm going to include all of these inside of the notebook and inside of the description below, so you don't need to remember these off scratch. They'll all be there. So we're just going to copy this URL here and include that as a string inside of our credentials dictionary. Now, if you deployed in London, Frankfurt, or Tokyo, then the associated URLs are going to be these ones here. So if it's London, then it's going to be EUGB. If it's Frankfurt, EUDE. If it's Tokyo, jp.tok. Now, in this case, what we've done is because we've deployed in Dallas, we've just pasted the US South URL. Now, the other thing that we're going to need is an API key. So this is an IBM Cloud API key as opposed to an existing Watson Machine Learning API key. So let's take a look at how we need to set this up. So in order to get this API key, we just need to go back to IBM Cloud. And then from up here, you can see that you've got this Manage tab. So if you select Manage and then select Access IAM, then all you need to do is go to, on this left-hand side, select API keys. So right there. And then hit Create an IBM Cloud API key. So you can see this button over here. All right, so it's Manage, Access IAM, API keys, and then go to Create an IBM Cloud API key. So let's do that. And we're going to call this one Scikit-Learn Cloud Key. But you could really name it whatever you want. In this case, we're going to call it Scikit-Learn Cloud Key. And then we're going to hit Create. And so this is then going to give us an API key that we can then work with. So in this case, this is the one that we've just created. So we're going to copy this down and make sure you copy it, because once you've created it and you close this, you're not going to be able to grab it again. So we're going to copy this and then jump back into our notebook and then paste this there as a string. And we need a comma after that. And that is our credentials dictionary set up. So for now, we don't actually need to jump back into IBM Cloud again. So we've now got our main thing. So we've set up our service and we've got our credentials. Now what we can start doing is start setting up our Watson Machine Learning client inside of our Jupyter Notebook. So let's do it. Alrighty, so that's the first part of setting up our service. So we've written 2 lines of code there. So the first one is we've created a new variable called WML client, and this represents our Python machine learning client. And then we've used our API client class, which we imported from IBM Watson Machine Learning up here. And then to that, we've passed through our Watson Machine Learning credentials, so this dictionary over there. Then what I've done is I've written another line, which is WML client.spaces.list. So this allows us to easily grab the ID for our deployment spaces. Now in this case, you can see that I've got a bunch. I've got dev, test, prod, and I've got some other ones here. We just need to copy this ID here. And what we're going to do is create a new string to hold this spaces ID. And so this space ID we're now going to set as our default. So when we actually go and deploy it, we're actually going to be deploying to prod. Now, another key thing to note, if you wanted to get this from your deployment spaces, you can just go to settings and you're going to be able to grab this space ID from over here as well. So you can see it's 7471 ends in a 2. We've got 7471 ends in a 2. So you're able to get it from multiple places. Now, in this case, we've got our space ID set. So we just want to set this as our default, because now when we go and deploy, we're going to default and deploy it into prod. So let's go ahead and set it as our default. Perfect. So if that's worked, you should get a success output. So in order to set our default, we've just used our machine learning client. So WML_client.set.default space. And then to that, we've passed through our space ID. So we've now configured our default space to be pointing towards prod. If you wanted to point to test or to dev, you just need to change which ID you're pointing to. So in this case, so if you wanted to deploy into multiple different spaces as part of your software development lifecycle, this is sort of where you'd be able to configure that. All right, now what we need to do is save and deploy our model. So let's start doing that. So we're going to set up a couple of key variables first up. So we're going to set up our model name, our deployment name, as well as the model that we want to deploy. So let's do it. Alrighty, so those are our variables set up. So we've set up 3 there. Let's just bring this into the middle of the screen. So we've gone and set one up for our model name. So in this case, we're going to name it Scikit-Learn Forecast. Our deployment name So Scikit-Learn deployment. So again, you can change this to whatever you want. In this case, we'll just stick in pretty generic ones. And then we've specified which model is our best model. So this variable over here, so best model, is actually from our pipelines that we saved as part of our training step. So in this case, really, it's just a Scikit-Learn object or model object, right? So if we actually output best model, you can see there that it's just our grid search pipeline. So this is our machine learning pipeline that we originally had. So we're actually going to be saving this up. All right, so we can minimize that. So the next thing that we need to do is actually go and save our model. So let's do it. Alrighty, so that is our model now saved into Watson Machine Learning. So we've actually written quite a fair bit there, so let's actually take a step back and step through it. So the first thing that we've done is we've actually gone and grabbed our environment definition. So in this case, we wanted to grab our Python 3.7 environment. So we've gone and grabbed that. So if we actually output that, you can see that this is grabbing our environment definition, so that specific unique identifier. And in order to do that, we've written WML client software specifications.get ID by name, and then we've passed through the environment that we want, so default underscore py 3.7. Then what we've gone and done is set up our model metadata. So this passes through some additional model properties to our deployment. So in this case, we've created a new dictionary called model props. And in this case, you can see we've got curly brackets there. And then we've gone and defined each one of those different metadata components. So we've specified our name, our type, and our software specification UID. And to do that, we've created a couple of variables. So specifically, we've done the first one, which is WML client.repository.model metanames.name. So this allows us to specify a model name, and this is our model name that we defined up here. And then we defined our model type. So here we define WML.repository.model metanames.type. And in here we specified it was scikit-learn underscore 0.23. So this is scikit-learn 0.23. If you're deploying a different model, for example, a TensorFlow model or a PyTorch model, then you'd update the type here. And then we pass through our software specification UID, which is this line here. For that, we've written WML client.repository.model metanames.software spec UID. And then we've passed through this UID that we grabbed up here. And then the magic happened. So then we went and saved our model. So here we've created a new variable called model details because this allows us to grab it later on. So if I actually output that, so this contains all of the detail about our model that we just saved up. Now in this case, to save our model into our Watson Machine Learning repository, what we wrote is WML client.repository.store model. So this actually takes our Python model and stores it up inside of Watson Machine Learning. Then we pass through a couple of keyword parameters. So model equals best model. And remember, this is our random forest model that we had right up here. So fit models RF. And then we've also passed through our metadata. So in this case, this dictionary here. So to do that, we've set the argument meta props equals model props. So these ones over here. Then we've also passed through some training data and our training target. So here, what we've done for our training data is we've passed through our xtrain data frame. So if I output that, you can see it's just a segment of our data frame. And then we've also passed through our training target, which is our y train. So if we take a look at that, this is just our Y column. And this is effectively what we use to train our model. So if you actually take a look at the full stack machine learning tutorials, you'll actually see how we built this up. And then we've passed through our pipeline. So in this case, we've specified pipelines RF, again, similar to our best model. So that's actually gone and saved our model. So if we take a look at model details again, you can see that it's telling us a bunch of information about it. So in this case, it's set in our Python 3.7 environment. We've got our space ID. We can take a look at our schema. So this tells us all the different columns it's expecting. And we've also got our metadata for our specific model down here as well. Now, the next thing that we want to do is actually go and grab our model ID, which is effectively this. So we could just copy and paste this, But from an automation step, we might want to grab this using code. So let's go and do it. Alrighty, so that's given us our model unique identifier. So it's 671, basically this number here, which is the same as what you can see up here. So we're going to need this model UID to actually go and deploy the model itself. So right now the model's just saved, but what we actually want to do is actually go and deploy it and create a REST API. Now the cool thing about this is if you actually go back into your deployment spaces and hit refresh now, so remember we set up our deployment space and it was called prod. What you'll actually see is that our asset and our model is now saved in there. So you can see that our Scikit-Learn forecast is actually there. Now what we actually want to do is take this model and then actually deploy it. So you can see that we don't have any deployments yet. If we wanted to, we could actually just do it from here and hit deploy, but we're going to do it using code. So let's go and deploy our model. And there you go. So we've gone and deployed our model. So to do that, what we've gone and done is we've specified deployment underscore props. And this is basically a new dictionary that's going to include all of our deployment metadata. Now, in order to do that, we've specified WML underscore client dot deployments dot configuration metanames dot name. And then we've set it as our deployment name, which we specified over here. And then what we've gone and done is we've specified WML underscore client dot deployments dot configuration metanames dot online. So this is basically specifying that we want an online deployment. Then the next component is actually deploying it. So to do that, we've used the command WML underscore client dot deployments dot create. So this is actually taking our previously saved model and actually going and deploying it. And then we've passed through our model ID. So this is that ID that we grabbed up here. So we've set the keyword parameter artifact underscore UID to our model ID. So what we're basically saying here is that we want to deploy our saved model that has this ID. And then we've also passed through our deployment properties. And we've saved all of that information inside of an ID called deployment. And then we've output that. And then you can see here that we've successfully gone and deployed our model, and we've got a whole bunch of information about it. So when we actually go to score our model, we're going to be using the details here. Now, a key thing to note that if you've got a really large model, you may need to upgrade and go to the next step in your Watson machine learning service. It really depends on how big your model actually is and how many capacity unit hours you've already used. All right, so we can minimize this now. Now we're up to step 6.4, actually scoring against our deployed model. So to do this, what we're going to do is grab our deployment UID and then actually send data from our pandas data frame to it. So let's go ahead and start doing that. And there you go. So we've now gone and made a scoring request against our deployed machine learning model. So you can see here that we've gone and written 3 lines of code. So the first one is grabbing our deployment UID. And remember, this is similar to grabbing our model UID, but this time we're actually grabbing the one for our deployment. So this is the one that we need in order to make API requests. So to do that, we've specified WML client.deployments.getUID, and then we've specified our deployment that we had from up here. And then we've gone and specified our payload, and we've saved that inside of a variable called payload. So there's quite a fair bit to here. So if I actually break this down, so we've gone and specified a key called input data, and then to that we've stored an array. Now within that array, we've got another key. So if I actually break that down again, and within that key, we've got 2 components, so fields and values. So our fields represent our columns within our data. So to grab that, we've used our xtest data frame, and then we've gone and grabbed our columns. We've converted that to a NumPy array, and then we've converted it to a list. And then for our values, we've gone and specified xtest.toNumpy.toList. So this is basically doing it similar to what we did over here, but rather than specifying 2 columns, we're actually just grabbing our entire data frame and converting it to a list. So if we actually take a look at our payload, it should be quite big. So there's quite a fair bit of information in here. But you can see that the first component is going to contain all of our columns. So these are our fields, and then the rest is going to be our data. So that's our payload. Then what we did in order to actually score is we specified WML client.deployments.score, and then we've passed through our deployment UID, which is what we grabbed over here. So when we actually wrote our command WML client.deployments.getUID, we actually stored that in a variable called deployment UID. And then we also passed through our payload. So this was our payload component over here, and then we output our results. And you can see that we've now got all of our prediction results there inside of a nice JSON object. But it doesn't stop there, right? So we've got these prediction results, but we probably want to put it inside of a pandas data frame again, right? So let's go on ahead and do that. Alrighty, so that's now done. So we've gone and done 3 key things there. So first up, what we did is we grabbed our prediction values. So to do that, we've traversed through our prediction result, which we had up here. And in terms of how we actually did that, so we grabbed our result, and then we went into our predictions key, which is this component here. And you can see that we're doing that there, over here. And then we're grabbing our first component or our first result, because you can see it's stored inside of an array over here. And then we're grabbing our values, which is this section here. But now you can see that each value is actually stored within a subarray. So what we can do is use mp.squeeze to actually just grab the entire value inside of an array. So if we actually take a look at this pred values variable that we stored it in, you can see that rather than having this entire JSON object here, we've just got a prediction values array, which we can now append to our data frame, which was exactly what we did in our next couple of lines. So then we created a new data frame, and for that we stored our xtest data frame, and we added our ytest component back, and this would have brought in our amount column. And then we appended our scores or our prediction results, and we stored that in a variable called scores. So in order to do that, we specified preddf, and then we passed through the key scores. So if this didn't exist already, it's gone and created a new column. And then we set our prediction values to that column. So you can see that it's now specified over there. So scores is actually our prediction result. And then we've gone and typed in preddf.head to actually show this column here. Now, what you might also want to do is output this to a CSV. So to do that, we can use our standard pandas.toCSV function. And this is going to output in the same folder that we've got our Jupyter notebook. So if I go and open that up, you can see that we now, in fact, have our results.csv file. So if we open that, it should look pretty similar to what we had inside of our pandas data frame. And indeed it does. So you can see all of our columns, and then we've got our amount as well as our scores. So exactly the same as what we had within our pandas data frame. And that about wraps it up. So we've gone through quite a fair bit. So we went and retrained our machine learning model using the existing code that we had here. And if we scroll all the way down to our deployment steps, then we went and installed and imported our dependencies. We authenticated and set up our space. So remember, we set it up inside of IBM Cloud here. And now also another cool thing to show is if we go and refresh our deployment spaces, you'll actually see that we've got our deployed model there. So if we select deployments, you can see that our deployment is now there and it's deployed. We also went and saved and deployed our model using Python, and then we went and scored against it and output our data frame. And that about wraps it up. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and tick that bell so you get notified of when I release future videos. And let me know what kind of machine learning model you're deploying with WML. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace.